So I'm making a plan for a 3 or 4 session. So I will evaluate on Thursday. Ankit will take care of the syllabus. I will add on several topics after this completion, right? So now, so what exactly architecture of MVC is? So first of all, you should have the simplest definition of MVC in an interview. MVC is the architectural pattern. It is an architectural pattern, not a design pattern. It's just an architectural pattern which applied over the engine of ASP.NET to develop the application, right? So MVC is the architectural pattern which applied over the engine of ASP.NET to develop the application. MVC is based on front controller pattern. It is based on the front controller pattern, and controller is responsible for creating a URL known as route in MVC. Controller is meant for making a URL known as a route in MVC. Every route is a combination of controller plus action. So route is a combination of controller plus action. And to create the route table in MVC, we have the class called route collection. So route collection is a class, and this class is having the extension method is called ignore route and map route. So map route is extension method it's the overloaded function. The first parameter of this method is the key. Second parameter is your route pattern. And third as a parameter is called ID as a optional. So route collection is a class. Map route is basically extension method of this class. And this method takes first parameter as a key. And second parameter is called URL pattern, known as route pattern. And third is ID as the optional. Now, so route table is defined within the routeconfig.cs file. So if you open the MVC, you will have one file called routeconfig.cs. routeconfig.cs. Now, Next point is, and we have by default route available in MVC. So if you go for watching the parameter of map route function, you will be getting a defaults. You will be getting a defaults. As we do in ASP.NET, startup page, defaults. And within the defaults, they have mentioned a default controller name, and default your action name. So second parameter is most important, is called route pattern as controller /action. Or you can change the sequence according to your convenient. It's called hackers free. For the security purpose, you can change the route URL pattern. You can write first action, then controller. So it gives you decoupling at this point. It gives you loose coupling at this point, not as a constraint where the URL will be always combination of sequence as a controller, then action. You can change the sequence for security purpose and hackers free purpose. Now, so overall route table gives you privileges, how you can define the pattern for route, and who will be the default route in this pattern. Now, next point is MVC as an application runs over MVC as an application runs over IIS and MVC gives you controller plus action known as route. So controller gives you action, and combination of controller plus action is said to be route. A route is defined within the route table by the function called map route. So question arises here, if a user request to the MVC route, so first request goes to IS, and from IS it moves to the MVC controller. So controller is the endpoint. So how request moves from the IIS to the controller, this is called MVC Request Pipeline. It's called Internal Architecture. Or you can say better, it's a request pipeline. It's a request processing. So how request moves from IIS to the controller. Because I just said to you, MVC follow a front controller pattern. So you have to request controller first. And in case of ASP.NET, we request to ASPX. It's a page controller pattern. So ASP.NET is based on page controller pattern. I request to ASPX page. Here I can't request to view. An extension for the view is a .cshtml. Extension for the view is .cshtml. So I can't request by the browser at this extension because I just said to you, it follow the front controller pattern. Now, overall, we got an idea. MVC is the architectural pattern which applied over the engine of ASP.NET to develop the highly decoupled application and secure application. Second point is MVC gives you privileges as a route table because MVC is based on a front controller pattern. So first request goes to controller. So without controller, you can't make a route. So to maintain the route, we have the route table. And route collection is a class, is having a function called map route. So map route function takes parameter for defining the route. And we have here route pattern is by default control plus action. So we can also change the route, first action and then controller. Now, so what is MVC, Internal Architecture or Request Pipeline? Come in sequence. At this point, we have the controller. Controller can have the action. In mathematics, the control plus action is basically a URL known as route. Second URL will be control plus next action. Third URL will be control plus a third action. So one controller can generate multiple URL. One controller can generate multiple route, right? That's a base part of MVC. So one controller can have got ability to generate multiple route. But in case of ASP.NET, I need to have multiple web page. ASPX page, second ASPX page, third ASPX page. Here, by the control plus action is said to be URL or route. And they follow pattern. They follow pattern. So pattern is defined within the routeconfig.cs. Second URL I want, define one more action in same controller or in other controller, doesn't matter. It also gives you URL or route and the pattern available within the routeconfig.cs file. So question arises at this point, now there is a route table. And within the route table, I'm having the pattern by default plus default route. So by default, MVC has given you privileges by default, the route pattern known as URL pattern and plus default. You can change the default one. You can go for defining own one as we do in ASP.NET startup base. This route table is managed by in MVC, the class called UrlRoutingModule. So UrlRoutingModule manages the route table, or I can say UrlRoutingModule handle the route table. UrlRoutingModule handle the route table. This is the cause whenever user a request from the browser, first request goes to the URL routing module. Whenever user a request to MVC application, so first request goes to the URL routing module. URL routing module intercept the requested route or URL and find in route table. So MVC request lifecycle, MVC pipeline starts from the first class in MVC is URL routing module. So whenever request comes to server, then server will handle the request, forward the request to the URL routing module, and URL routing module intercept the requested URL and find in route table. If requested URL is available in route table, then MVC forward the request to the route handler. RouteHandler. Otherwise, it returned a request to the custom error, which is available within the IS if 404 URL is not found. So UrlRoutingModule intercept the requested URL and find in route table. If it is available, it forward the request to RouteHandler, and RouteHandler is associated to internally MvcHandler. So RouteHandler will forward the request to MvcHandler. MvcHandler plays a major role in case of MVC. So I will go for practical implementation for the RouteHandler and MvcHandler. Wait for the next session, part 2, tomorrow. So first request goes to UrlRoutingModule, then to RouteHandler, and then to MvcHandler. We can customize this handler. Why do we customize this handler? Wait for part 2 session. Otherwise, by default, handler is RouteHandler, and by default, handler for MVC is MvcHandler. MvcHandler act as a entry point for the controller. MvcHandler class act as an entry point for the MVC controller. Because MvcHandler class internally implements the interface, MvcHandler class internally implements the interface is IHTTP handler. IHTTP handler internally. So IHTTP handler is an interface. This interface is having a function called a process request. So process request is a function, is abstract function in your IHTTP handler interface. And this function is being defined by the MVC handler, obviously, because this class is implementing this interface. This class is bounded to define this method. So process request act as an entry point for MVC application. So now, what is MVC request lifecycle? Whenever user a request from the browser, the first request goes to the URL routing module. URL routing module takes requested URL, scan in route table. If it is available in route table, it forward the request to a route handler. A route handler defaultly associated to MVC handler. How? Wait for part 2 session tomorrow. An MVC handler class internally implement the interface is called IHTTP handler. This interface is having a properties along with the function, and function name is called process request, and this function is being defined by the class called MVC handler. So process request act as a main. It act as a main for web application called MVC. It act as an entry point for the MVC controller. Now, it act as an entry point, it act as a main function. Within the process request function, the default controller factory, within the process a request function, default controller factory class instantiate a controller class. So default controller factory
मेरे लैपटॉप को चार्जर
default controller factory instantiate a controller class internally. So who instantiate the controller class in MVC is called default controller factory. So default controller factory instantiate a controller class. As soon as when a controller class gets instantiated, then obviously the controller class default constructor will be called, right? So we should not forget the 4 classes name in MVC. The first is the URL routing module. Second is the route handler. Third is the MVC handler. And fourth is the most important one for the dependency injection is the default controller factory. So default controller factory class internally instantiate the controller class in MVC. As soon as the controller class gets instantiated, obviously, then the default constructor will be called. The default constructor will be called. And default constructor in control class of MVC internally associate with the ActionInvoker. ActionInvoker. Default constructor of control class is defaultly associated with the ActionInvoker. And role of ActionInvoker is it is meant for executing the action. So who runs Sandeep action in MVC? ActionInvoker class. Okay. Who triggered the action in MVC? ActionInvoker class. Okay. Who instantiated the control in MVC? The default controller factory. And if you don't know this class name, default controller factory, you never know the mean of dependency injection in MVC. So the purpose of learning MVC request pipeline, we can easily learn the dependency injection. We can easily understand the mean of your dependency injection, and we can also go for URL rewriting. So if you don't know the fact of MVC request pipeline, you never know URL rewriting, and you never know dependency injection. This is the cause. Being as a developer, I should know, and we should know the internal. So we came to conclusion, the 4 classes helps for request pipeline is called URL routing module, then route handler, then your MVC handler, then the process request function act as a main, act as an entry point, and within the main function, a default controller factory instantiate the controller class, and as soon as controller class gets instantiated, it called the what? Default constructor, and ActionInvoker is inbuilt associate to default constructor, and ActionInvoker helps to execute the action. And when action gets executed, then your razor view engine comes into picture to load the view onto a memory, a razor view engine. So after ActionInvoker, the razor view comes into picture. It load the razor view engine into memory. Then you can get the output on a screen, right? So now come back and go for desk. Desk. So look at MVC request pipeline. So request comes from browser to MVC. So first request goes to URL routing module. Then URL routing module handle the requested URL and find in route table. Select the matching route. Once it is done, it forward a request to the route handler. The route handler or forward the request to MVC handler, and MVC handler class internally implement the interface is called ISTTP handler, and ISTTP handler interface is having a function called process request, which act as a entry point for the MVC application Then controller object created by the controller factory, and the controller factory name is a default controller factory, and default controller factory stands strictly what controller class. Then your action invoker comes. So don't forget the action invoker name. So action invoker basically execute the action. Then action filter comes. Then action filter comes. So when Sandeep, action filter comes into picture just after action invoker. So action invoker is responsible for executing the action or not. Then your filter comes, right? So how was this session, Ankit, so far?
So very good, sir.
Excellent, sir.
It's have been great.
So just go for 2 minutes recording, and I want this record should be uploaded in a YouTube by Sambhav Verma, right? Give me 2 minutes.
I'm not recording, sir.
Ankit is recording the class. Fine. So Ankit, stop recording. Ankit, stop recording. So Ankit will give to Sambhav sir, and Sambhav will upload into YouTube. Now,
Sure, sir. Done.
give me 2 minutes of break. Let me start next topic.